Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be back. I hope that everyone was able to enjoy this time off, recoup a little, to kind of finish this semester out strong. I hope that everyone was also able to enjoy their holidays with their family as well. Today, I'm going to be presenting on fetishistic disorder. So, fetishistic disorder is also known as fetishism or fetish for short, a disorder characterized by sexual deviance, recurrent and intense sexual arousals from either the use of an inanimate object or objects, or a highly specific fixation of non-genital body parts as manifested by fantasies, urges, or behaviors for over a period of 6 months. The diagnostic code is as seen here. This disorder can be found under the paraphilic disorder section. The fantasies, sexual urges, or behaviors must cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. It is important to note that symptoms of this disorder is not exclusive nor limited to articles of clothing used in cross-dressing seen in transvestic disorder, or devices designed for tactical genital stimulation, such as from a vibrator, are not limited, again, objects to this disorder. A combination of both types may mutually occur. Specifiers. So there are specifiers to this disorder. As mentioned, body parts or a body part, non-living objects of specific preference, and others. A few examples may include a fetish to female undergarments, or an exclusive focus on an intensely eroticized body part, such as feet, or a fetishistic interest may meet the criteria for various combinated specifiers, such as socks, shoes, and again, feet. There are specific environments to also take note of as well. In controlled environments, this specifier is applicable to individuals living in settings where opportunities to engage in fetishistic behaviors are restricted, such as work. In full remission, specifiers are applicable to individuals exhibiting no symptoms of distress or impairment in areas of functioning aforelisted for at least 5 years while in an uncontrolled environment. Very important to note. So what are the diagnostic criteria? So a diagnosis, for a diagnosis of fetishistic disorder, requires a concurrent fulfillment of both the behaviors characterized by the following two criterions. Criterion A involves the persistent and repetitive use of or dependence on non-living objects, or a highly specific focus on a non-genital body part as primary element associated with sexual arousal. Criterion B must report or exhibit clinically significant personal distress or psychosocial role impairment. Course and prevalence. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, paraphilias have an onset during puberty, and this is in general. But fetishes, to be specific and to be exact, can develop prior to adolescence, usually salient in adolescents with sexual curiosity. Once established, fetishistic disorder tend to have a continuous course that fluctuates in intensity, and frequency of urges or behavior. A random association between an object or objects or non-genital body parts to feeling of sexual gratification, and activities related to sexual abuse also play a part in its course. Now, what do I mean by a random association? So a random association may be innocent or unappreciated for its sexual content when it initially occurs, right? For example, a male may enjoy the texture or tactile sensation of female undergarments or stockings. At first, the pleasurable sensation, however, occurs randomly. Then in time and with experience, the behavior of using female undergarments or stockings are part of now a sexual activity or pattern that becomes reinforced, and the association between the garments and the sexual arousal is now established. As far as the prevalence is unknown. However, what is known is that the majority of fetishists are male. There has not been enough research to determine a prognosis to this diagnosis, which leads into my next point, but unfortunately I do not have a slide to speak on a prognosis. So cultural considerations, socioeconomic status, social environment, and religion. These are considerations that I kind of made up on my own, so to speak. There has not been enough literature to speak on these cultural considerations to adequately at least explain the cross-cultural race, ethnic, or other considerations that can lead to an essential explanation to a person's identity and impact of the diagnosis. But socioeconomic status is interesting. I chose socioeconomic status as a cultural consideration because let's go back to the previous beginning slides where I mentioned the course, the onset of the symptoms for fetishistic disorder. I mentioned that adolescents that are sexually curious may begin to experiment to kind of fulfill that curiosity that eats at them. So when I say socioeconomic status, I am more so speaking on adolescents that come from maybe affluent socioeconomic background. So let's say an adolescent who comes from a fairly affluent, wealthy family, let's say, can perhaps have can afford to experiment, if that makes sense. Can afford to experiment, and as time goes on, can continue to thrive on that experimentation and kind of solidify their fetishistic interest and attraction to become their ultimate sexual gratification object, or object to kind of feed into their feed into their arousal. let's keep it at that. Social environment is interesting as well. So culture is interesting because culture can define and describe what is normal and what is deviant. The same goes for religion. Social environment, this point that I'm about to make, goes hand in hand with social environment and religion. So religion can also do that as well for people in specific cultures. What is defined as normal and what is defined as abnormal, what is defined as deviant. Culture and socialization influence human sexual desire. Certain cultures and certain religions place major importance on certain body parts and certain sexual practices. Now, it is inevitable that that in a culture where patriarchy and a male in control in societies, it is inevitable to see this, to see fetishism take place in patriarchal societies. It's very common in men to see. Especially female sexuality is subjugated and more likely to be affected by social and cultural factors in general. So these considerations are important to keep in mind. So history. So the first case of fetishism was reported back in the 19th century. Van Graft, Ebbing, and Havelock Ellis believed that the classic characteristic of attraction toward inanimate objects and non-genital body parts occurred as a result of associated experiences. Freud theorized that fetishists lean towards inanimate objects to overcome feelings of low self-confidence and inadequacy, and that fetish behavior stemmed from early childhood traumas. Fetishism, is a term that was derived from French and Portuguese language. And interestingly enough, fetishism before was looked as some sort of supernatural power. So what is the ideology on this? There are none. I've done plenty of research on this, and there's not literature backing on what the ideology for this disorder is. So therefore, it has not been found. So assessment. So how is this disorder assessed? So it can be assessed via interviews, questionnaires, inventory surveys, second, third-party information, psychiatric history, police reports, victim statements, things of that sort. I have in an assessment, it is important to screen for the development and content of sexual fantasies, age of onset, frequency, and masturbatory practices, fantasies in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, use of pornography, history of sexual history, sexual and general delinquency, anxiety or level of distress associated to the condition. These are crucial to assess for. So what are the differential diagnoses to rule out here? So transvestic disorder, as I mentioned earlier, may resemble the most to fetishistic disorder, with the attraction and sexual gratification to cross-dressing and articles of clothing that both